Ready to open the hood? UseTool for the tutorials.
And for car parts, the right idea is the Mr. Auto app. Easy, fast, and with better prices than on the website.
You will find the bulk shock absorbers used in the video exclusively on the Mr. Auto website and through the link in the description. Turn your engine off. Pull up the handbrake. Pull on the bonnet release lever and open the bonnet. To change the front shock absorbers on your car, you must lift the front of the vehicle and remove the wheels. This will give you full access to the suspension system. Loosen the stud bolts on the front wheels. Raise the front of the vehicle. And put it in the two-axle stands. We strongly suggest watching the tutorial, raising your vehicle safely before carrying out this step. You will then be able to take off the wheels. Don't forget to slide them under the vehicle. During this operation, you will work on the steering system of your vehicle. Checks on tyre alignment, when carried out by a professional, will guarantee that your steering system has been perfectly aligned and is in good working order. Now you have to remove the upper ball joint on the sway bar link. To do this, we recommend that you watch the video how to replace the sway bar link's BMW 1 Series E87. Open the connection box and clean it with a brush. Detach the wiring from its clips on the connection box. You can now pull the plug out of the ABS sensor by pulling it firmly. It is now time to remove the clevis brake system. Using a socket wrench and an 18mm socket, unscrew the two holding screws on the brake caliper mount. You can now remove the entire set and attach it to the body so that you don't pull on the brake hose. Now you have to remove the tie rod end. To do this, we recommend that you watch the video how to replace the outer tie rod BMW 1 Series E87. Now you have to remove both control arm ball joints. To do this, we recommend that you watch the video how to replace the control arms BMW 1 Series E87. Brush the screw of the shock absorber base and spray it with degreaser. Then, using a ratchet, an 18mm socket and a 16mm spanner, loosen the bolt on the shock absorber foot. Remove the ABS sensor cable. Then remove the screw and the ABS sensor mounting bracket. Brush the bottom of the shock absorber and spray it with penetrating oil. This will help with future manipulations. Prepare a stable, elevated surface to place all the stub axle once you have removed it. Using a hammer, slide a thin chisel into the opening of the stub axle at the shock absorber base. This will create a slight opening to help you remove the shock absorber with ease. Hit the axle stop to release the shock absorber base. Then, using a ratchet, a 13mm socket and a 13mm spanner, loosen the 3 screws holding the shock absorber in place. Once loosened, hold the shock absorber with one hand and finish unscrewing it with the other. Remove the shock absorber. In order to change the shock absorber, you must now separate it from the spring. You can find a description of the tool used in the video, which we think is most adapted to the operation. Be careful. Pay close attention as you compress the spring, as this is a risky step that should be undertaken with extreme caution. Position the shock absorber in the vise. Then tighten the shock absorber spring compressors. Check that they're properly held by the locking studs and slowly compress the spring using the socket wrench and the appropriate socket. Once the shock absorber is free in the spring, remove the nut cover with a flat screwdriver. Then, using a 21mm offset wrench and a 6mm Allen key, loosen the strut mount. In the most extreme cases, you have to use an impact wrench. You can also use the specific tool used in the video, which will make your task much easier. Then remove the suspension strut support bearing components, the upper spring support, the restraint bellow assembly. Remove the spring from the shock absorber. Recover the low spring retainer.
All parts used in this tutorial are supplied by our trusted partners. These partners also help us create as many video tutorials as possible. Check them out in the description below.
You can find the bulk parts and products used in the video in the Mr. Auto website and linked in the description. Take your new shock absorber. Before installing the new shock absorbers, it is necessary to prime them by pressing the shock absorber rod vertically so that the gas and the hydraulic fluid are separated. Unscrew the lock nut on the stem. Position the new shock absorber in the vise. Then install the lower shock absorber support. Place the spring on the shock absorber with the spring resting on the stop of the lower shock absorber support. Put the restraint bellows back in. Reinstall the upper spring support. Then install the washer, the shock absorber mount, and finish by screwing in the lock nut onto the shock absorber stem. Make sure it is well tightened. Unscrew the spring compression tool, paying attention to the position of the spring on the lower shock absorber support. You have now finished preparing the new part. Clean the bearing surface of the suspension strut support bearing with a brush and grease it lightly. Take the new shock absorber. Put the nut cover back on. Insert the shock absorber starting from the top part. Tighten the 3 screws on the shock head by a few threads. Sand and grease the inside of the stub axle to help facilitate the reinsertion of the shock absorber. Position the shock absorber foot by the opening of the stub axle and note that you may use a jack to help you lift it. The bottom positioning pin of the shock absorber foot must be inserted into the opening of the stub axle. Using the hammer, insert a chisel into the opening of the axle stub. Push the shock absorber in until the tab comes to a stop. Remove the chisel. Remove the jack. Install the ABS sensor hose mounting bracket on the new shock absorber. Then reinstall the shock absorber foot screw. Roughly tighten the shock absorber foot screw. Reinstall the control arms. Then screw the nuts back on. Reinstall the ball joint in the pivot. Then screw it back in. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Put the sway bar link back in place. Then screw it back in. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Finish tightening the shock absorber base screw. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. For the final tightening of the control arms, it is now necessary to lift the control arms of the ball joint using the jack. The silent blocks on the engine subframe side must be tightened in the vehicle on the ground position in order to preserve their integrity. It is now time to refit the brake caliper system. Then using a ratchet and an 18mm socket, tighten the two caliper screws. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Clip the ABS sensor hose back in. Then reconnect it. And insert the plug into the housing. Put the wheels of your vehicle back on and lower it to the ground. The final tightening of the 3 strut support bearing retaining bolts is done with the vehicle on the ground and with a torque spanner. Operation completed.
Hi, it's Theo from UseTool. I hope this video has helped you a lot in your car maintenance. We will be super grateful if you could spread the word so that we can produce even more tutorials. Simply give us a like, a comment, and hit that subscribe button. It really helps us boost the channel and help the whole community. Thanks a lot and have a great one.